European populism. Pelle Neroth Taylor on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to the Pelle Neroth Taylor Show. We've got Craig Rucker next. He's the president of the Committee for Constructive Tomorrow, cfac.org. And we're going to talk about climate. As I said in my introduction, Ed Miliband, the UK Minister for Green Issues, wants to expand the use of wind power and solar power in a country that can barely afford all the other things it must invest in to stop its increasingly unsatisfied population. But at the same time, in Europe, there is some sort of slowdown of the net zero projects, isn't there, Craig? Welcome to the show, by the way.
Well, thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure to be on. And yeah, actually, I would say Britain is kind of going against the tide compared to the rest of Europe on this one. Of course, the EU elections that took place in June really hit the Green Party hard. They lost about a third of their seats in Germany. They got cleaned out of Portugal. He took a hit also in France. However, during this same time period, there was a kind of reversal of this in the UK, where Sunak was defeated by Starmer, and you had the Tories defeated by the Labour Party, and so they kind of went the opposite way. And as a result of that, a consequence, it was supposedly a more moderate regime that came into Britain. They weren't the supposedly crazy Labour Party, but we see some evidence that maybe they are a little bit. You have the UK's new chancellor there, what's her name, Rachel Reeves, just announcing like a major hike on offshore oil, which is put at risk many of the 200,000 jobs in that industry that go in England. And you also have Miliband opening up new ways that you can get offshore wind and solar to be increased in the UK. And, so they're attacking fossil fuels, going after, trying to promote renewables, which have never shown themselves to work anywhere in the world. So I think tragically, the UK is kind of going the opposite way, while the rest of Europe seems to be correcting its excesses.
I was just reading one of Steve Gorham's books. He's really good, writes really well for an audience that is not expert on the topic. And he says, I don't know if I can't cite the exact chapter and verse, but some American net zero project was by 2050. If you want to get 50% of your energy from wind and solar power, you have to cover like 4 American states with wind power. Now, and so if you scale that to UK, English, not UK, because England is just one constituent part of the United Kingdom, you'd have to cover much of England, literally. I mean, with wind turbines and solar panels, and that's assuming England even had. So it doesn't. And plus all the migrants who have to be housed in cities, like 5 cities the size of Cambridge every year from now until perpetuity, and you've got to keep some greenery so you can ride your fox hunts in it, whatever. So it doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, what are they thinking?
It's actually worse than that, because yes, you would have to cover 4 states, let's say, or pretty much all of the UK with solar panels or wind turbines off the coast. But that still doesn't provide you all your electricity needs, because of course, the sun doesn't shine at night. So these solar units are putting nothing out at night, right when people need them. And wind is erratic as well. It's generally the case that renewable power actually provides what it says it will, somewhere between 25% and 35% of the time, which means over 2/3 of the time you need backup, or you need to store it in batteries. And there isn't the battery technology that's available right now to store it. So it's okay. It's providing, yes, that amount for a very, times often when we don't need it. But because we don't have any backup for when we do need it, it's just wasted energy. And so you need natural gas, you need hydropower, you need some nuclear power, some other source of energy that can be called upon when these things don't perform. So I don't know how you ever get away using renewable energy without having your conventional sources to back it up.
Why the UK often seems to go in lockstep with America on many issues, but here they're out of step with practically everyone, as you said, What's going on there? I mean, are you following? I just want to talk about the UK because it's UK is in the world news because there's riots going on and people are very unhappy in that country because of immigration and very unhappy about Labour. Um, can you tell us a little bit more about the British climate and give us some of the background? Because I think that Ed Miliband, the British were always quite proud of being in the forefront in the environmental movement.
I think it's twofold. One is I think people have just been educated. I mean, you got kids coming out of public school now that have been told that renewable energy is cheap, green, it can provide all electricity, or they'll say something in the media is the other big component, is they'll make these claims, this can power 200,000 homes. Well, yes, but that's not accurate. Those 200,000 homes, maybe a quarter to a third of the time, you're going to need to get your electricity elsewhere, as I talked about earlier. So I think it's just the papers and the media have not been covering this accurately. I think the reason you're seeing the pushback in Europe is because the chickens have come home to roost. You're looking at the protests that took place, starting back with the Gilets jaunes, yellow vest protest back in 2019. You saw the farmers earlier this year very upset about their nitrogen fertilizers. You have the blackouts. You have the Brandenburg gates going dark at night. You have German parliament members talking about people having to basically take cold showers, stop using hot showers, and one shower every few days. And people are, starting to see the full fruits of all this, just like in America, they starting to see with the electric vehicles. These things were not popular. They couldn't move them off the lots. They're enormously expensive. They're limited in range. And, you're going to need a grid that can actually house all these electric vehicles, and you aren't going to do that on solar and on wind power. It just can't be done. Every country that actually goes heavy in renewables, whether it's Denmark, which is the poster child of all these things, or California or wherever it else is in the United States, has to import electricity. So they are able to use that electricity of solar and wind and make big claims. Or politicians, we're solving global warming. But if you ask them at the end of the day, how are you doing that? Inevitably, you take New York State, they're getting their electricity from Pennsylvania and from coal places like West Virginia, or in the case of California, they're importing it from, Nevada or Arizona, or in the case of Denmark, they're getting hydropower from Sweden. They're always having to get real power to back up this kind of phony power.
Justin, what we're talking about, I mean, on the one hand, you've got we call it a green lash against net zero. So I'm just quoting Wall Street. Climate Action 100 Plus describes itself as an investor-led initiative to ensure that the world's largest corporate greenhouse gas emitters take appropriate action on climate change. But it seems that in recent months, some of the biggest investors into that project have decided to change strategy. JP Morgan Chase and State Street have pulled all funds from Climate Action 100 Plus commitments, while even their larger colleague BlackRock reduced its holdings and scaled back its ties to the group. Now, one thing I've learned from hosting this show is just how powerful these companies are at pushing companies to have these DEI projects and as well as very green projects. But does that indicate a sobering up in BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase?
It is. And I think a lot of it had to do with the pushback. We take pride that we were part of the coalition of groups that started stepping on these guys. But I think what really hit them hard were the red states back in the United States. Is they divested themselves from BlackRock, take them, and said, we're not putting any of our state retirement pension funds in you until you step off of this DEI. They also call it ESG, Environmental Social Governance Grants. And as a result of that, Larry Fink, for example, the president of BlackRock, just a few years ago, was talking about how every investment's going to be for, net zero, clean, green, all this stuff. Now he's sounds a totally different tune. He's backing off of that entirely. Ford Motor, Farley, equivocating, now stepping back on his pledge to go all EV by 2030 or 35. You have Jamie Dimon doing the same. And so you got a real stepping back of this, at least in the United States. I have not heard of them stepping back in England because I think the political climate still is a little more woke than it is in the United States. But I think given time, they will step back because it's unrealistic. They can't achieve the ends they're talking about unless people are willing to live like the Olympians are supposedly being forced to do, using air conditioning that only cools it down to the mid 70s or maybe 80 during a hot day, which is no air conditioning at all. So that's what you're facing.
Okay, well, talking about the Olympians, maybe get more light-hearted talk for next couple of minutes. An alleged Last Supper parody during the Paris opening ceremony raised hackles, but the actual food and offer at the Olympic Village has ignited a debate which reached Brussels this week over the athletes' need for a meat-based diet. The German men's hockey team has panned the food served at the Olympic Village, calling it disaster, while British athletes flew in an additional chef to bridge the shortfall of supply. Apparently, there's a shortage of protein because of this. They don't want meat, and dairy takes up too much land or whatever. So I don't know. They're not eating insects yet, but I don't know. You've got any thoughts about that? So the Olympic, as you know about that famous boxing. I mean, that's become the kind of global news. Everyone talks about it. Where I am, this guy beating up a woman.
Algeria, right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's. I mean, it's not that. It's because it's people are fed up with woke, and they're seizing on that as evidence of how everything. It's become a people's movement. Everybody knows about this boxer and his XY chromosomes. But this second example, do you think that people are waking up to I don't know, the dietary consequences of going for net zero?
My hope is they are. I first off, I found it kind of odd that of all transgender countries, somebody could come from it's Algeria. But leaving that aside, I think it's also kind of remarkable that you have, the mayor of Paris setting all this green agenda. What her name, I think, is Hildego. And she was the one who set the agenda right off the bat. This was going to be like the greenest Olympics, and talked about changing the air conditioning. Now you have a guy who I guess is like Mr. Bean, changing the diets for the athletes, trying to get rid of all the meat-based diets to lower the carbon footprint. And you having countries work around both of them. They're bringing in their own cooks, like you just mentioned. Also, a lot of these countries are shipping in their own air conditioning units because they're not going to have their athletes compete at a high level and be toasty hot doing it. I think the electric bus are some of our women gymnasts also complained on their way to go and get the gold, which they won, came looking very disheveled. Everybody asked them why they were disheveled and looking like they were, not in the best of circumstances. They still won. They said because the buses were just hot, they couldn't operate well. So we're seeing kind of a firsthand what happens at the Olympics when you try and go completely green. It's not working out too well. People are making exceptions for it. And I think people will start to wise up as they experience the ramifications of the Green New Deal. But, are politicians waking up? No, Hildego still is what she's saying. I think the Gavin Newsom in California, he's still talking nonsense. You saw what's happening in Europe with Miliband and Starmer and others that are still forcing this idea. And one of our political candidates here, you got Kamala Harris.
Well, I was going to say, tell us a little bit about the U.S. election and Kamala Harris and her, because I know she was a prosecutor, so she wasn't really associated with green goals, but she hasn't given a press conference or anything. I mean, she's a blank slate, and just cackles a bit and says, but she's definitely had a poll bump. That she's like a monarch, a queen who doesn't have to say anything, and she symbolizes, I guess, equality or something for a lot of people. But do we have any idea what her climate policies might be?
Well, she did make a brief announcement that she's going to continue and maybe even take further the advances that Biden made, which is kind of frightening if, in fact, it happens. You would see this in normally. There's kind of this bump, new candidate, Biden's out of the picture. You're going to see another bump for Kamala when they have the Democratic National Convention shortly in August. You'll probably see another one when she picks a VP. But I don't really think the campaign starts in earnest until after Labor Day. Then you should start taking a look at where it's at. I know the smart money, the Vegas money, people always talk, but you sometimes just kind of look at where they're putting their money down, and Trump still has like a 60-40 edge, according to Vegas. So I think a lot of this right now is because she hasn't opened her mouth, and she hasn't gone on a debate yet. So people are, trying to assume the best.
Could you just tell for a European audience? I mean, we have these cliches about California, the land of surfing and immense wealth and palm trees and Hollywood and all the rest of it, aviation industry. But I mean, hasn't Gavin Newsom screwed up the country, its power supply system, so that you have these? So it's not exactly an advertisement for the way that the Democrats have handled energy issues. Just tell us a little bit about how energy supply and climate issues have been in California for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, they've
a minute and a half left.
Yes, we've gone very green. They've decommissioning their last nuclear plant, which is odd given their concern about climate change. They're trying to get rid of all their fossil fuel plants and going all renewable. That said, in order to make up for it, as we talked about earlier, they're having to import electricity from other states because they don't have enough to service themselves. I think California lately has become a have and have not state. It's losing population. It's one of the few that is. People are moving out, but those who have the wealth are doing very well. It's almost a feudal system now, and those who don't, they're getting public services and not living so well. If you go and visit like Oakland or San Francisco, you'll see big tent cities of people that are not just immigrants. I've actually went down into these cities. There may be dads who have had a divorce and can't afford to find a place for themselves, so they give all their check to their ex-wife and their kids, and they're living in tents. And you see miles of these tents all over the state. It's a disaster zone. So I think if you want to see the rest of the country become California, elect Kamala Harris. But I don't think she's going to win. We'll see.
Well, extremely interesting there. And of course, just a quick short answer. Hasn't there been any domestic political pressure inside California against what Newsom's been doing? I mean, couldn't the Republicans, I know it's been a Democratic state for a long time, but couldn't the Republicans do a comeback?
I think they have. And as a matter of fact, in the last election, the off-year election, California and New York State were the reasons the Republicans took over the House. I mean, those are two uncharacteristic states. They held their own in the red states, but it's these blue areas.
Sorry, we got to wind up there. Sorry, because we've got the hourly news and that can't be changed. Craig Rucker, thank you so much, President for the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, cfac.org. Love to have you on again. Always good stuff. Excellent analysis. Back after the news.